This podcast is presented by the Prince George's County Memorial Library System.
Hi, I'm Heather, and this is our podcast, These Books Made Me. In our last episode, Katniss's prowess with the bow saved the lives of her family, friends, and herself time and again. We wanted to know more about archery, so we reached out to an archer to discuss all things bows and arrows. Please enjoy a special bonus interview with our Hannah and an archer and lover of YA Lit, who is also named Hannah.
All right, thanks for being here today. And I just have to say, first of all, that I think it's awesome that I am Hannah interviewing another Hannah. Could we start off by having you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Hannah. I live in Virginia, and I work for the federal government, and I'm an analyst. And I started archery when I was in middle school, just like at summer camp, and just kind of left it at summer camp. And then fast forward to 2015, and I picked it back up again thanks to a friend. So he got me back into it.
That's wonderful. Yeah, we were so thrilled when you agreed to talk to us about archery. We just read The Hunger Games for our episode on that book, and we were really hoping to get a better understanding of how realistic or not the portrayal of archery is in that series. But before we do that, have you read The Hunger Games and or seen the movies? Do you like young adult and or dystopian works?
Young adult books, they're my favorites. I have a soft spot for them, and I continue to read them. So it helps me hold on to the young part of young adult. So I have read all the Hunger Games, not the Ballard one that came out most recently, but the first original three. And then I've seen the first three movies. I haven't quite seen the first one yet. I see it's now out on streaming, so hopefully soon. And I enjoyed them a lot. I still think the first one was my favorite just because it kind of just did the whole idea of everything. At that time when I read it, I hadn't really done archery a lot. And because I think I read it back, the first one in 2012 or so when they were coming out. And I really liked that they started building this archery character because I had always liked it in middle school. And it's just not something that I got a lot of, I guess, characters in my normal reading. With just being out of college, a lot of my reading was textbooks, a lot of political science, some French books, and just never really got to read for fun. And it kind of got me back into it. And I loved them. I thought she was kind of an intense, great kind of female, young, strong female character there going against all odds. So definitely enjoyed them.
Yeah, I feel like when you're coming out of finishing up an academic program, there's that moment where you're trying to regain your ability to read for pleasure. And you need something to kind of get you out of the academic mode. And I think like a fun, intense young adult series sounds like the perfect thing to kind of get you back into reading for fun. Yeah, I enjoyed reading this series as well.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting how they did just the differences in archery, because if I recall, she starts off with like very basic archery just for hunting, and then how they take what is very elementary and personal, and then they really go with it throughout the whole series. And it becomes, for her, it's something she had to do hidden, and it was how she survived. And then later it became so open. And then it was also how she survived. It's just kind of cool to see how that dynamic shifted. And
I'm going to ask what is probably a foolish question, but I feel like the description of what she uses to fire her arrows with is sparse, or perhaps I glided over that when I read. You seem to figure out what type of bow she was using. What about the narrative gives you information about the type of bow that she uses? Do you mind speaking a little bit about that?
So I had to like refresh my memory because I remembered in the movie she shot a recurve bow. So the three main types of bows that you see are long bows, recurve, and then compound bow. Personally, I shoot a compound now. when I first tried archery for the first time, it was a recurve because it's very easy to kind of get the feel for it because you just pull it back. Usually you're not shooting, when you're learning, you're not shooting far distances. It's used a lot in trick archery because it's so quick to pull back and you shoot close by, but you're not trying to put a ton of force behind something. And so in the book, I had went back and researched this really quickly. And it was a bow, I believe, that her father had made her that she kept in a tree. So that was one thing I started thinking about after you sent me those questions and the feasibility of using a handmade bow and arrow, because if she couldn't hunt, she was most likely using primitive bows, unable to keep modern technology, probably using arrows that she had to make. And one thing that's interesting is you can make a bow in a day. Arrows take a lot more. And so I learned that at the Renaissance Festival, actually, in Annapolis or Crownsville. And that was where bows were easy to make, but when you made your arrows, you needed wood, you needed feathers, you needed somebody to carve the tips. And if she's making her own tips and all that stuff, I don't think it delves into that. But every time you shoot something, you have to factor in gravity. Every arrow, if it's different, is going to shoot different. And then every time that you do that, you kind of have to adjust. So I believe in the first book when she does her trials, she misses the first target. And that makes sense because when you have a new bow and new arrows, you need to sight in, for lack of better terms, because it's going to shoot differently. So it makes sense that she would miss it. But the amount of strength that you would have to actually use to pull back a recurve bow to hunt and actually successfully kill a deer or something like that, that's going to take a lot more strength than what you would need for a compound bow. Because compound bows, they have levers and pulleys that kind of help you. It amplifies the force with which you shoot your arrow because of this pulley system. So it's easier to pull back. You don't have to pull back as much weight to have that much force. With a recurve bow, you have to pull it back further. And if you're a petite woman who's starving, it's going to be a lot harder for you to pull that force back and successfully take down a larger animal from a distance. And that was kind of one of the things that I noticed in the books and series after I did archery was when you're shooting at something, you don't just shoot right away at it. You have to account for gravity. So that's just kind of where some of the not so realistic versus if you're really close up on something could be a little bit more feasible. Those are just some little things that I noticed.
Okay, so it's maybe not necessarily plausible that not having a lot of food around Katniss would necessarily have the upper body strength to pull back a recurved bow. Am I understanding that correctly?
So she could still do it because one of the things that I realize is if you're hunting every day. You're hunting for survival. You're building up that strength. And archery is a very weird sport in the sense that you really only use that muscle group doing archery. Because when you think about when you pull back, that is not a natural motion. That really engages your back in a way that you're not used to using it. So you have to build it up. If it's a close by target, feasibly she could have that strength. But if she's going for something that's 50 yards, then that'll be, in my opinion, much harder. So that is just one thing to kind of keep in mind. And I do think in the movie they say if she hits the deer, what is she going to do with it? How is she going to carry it out? Which is another thing that I'm glad they kind of put in there as a qualifier.
Yeah, deer is big.
That it is.
And then in the books and the movies, at one point she starts, we're jumping ahead of the first book, but she starts using a bow that makes things explode. So it's, maybe a couple layers of being removed from reality and a normal bow. So hard to judge how realistic that is, I suppose.
Yeah, that's not going to be very realistic. I think the arrows were supposed to also kind of factor into that. But it is, I think she takes down in the movies a plane with it.
Yes. That's the next level bow there.
Yeah. So also too, it's the amount of explosives that you would need on the tip of an arrow to do that would be quite a lot. And
right.
that would not fly.
I feel like the arrow would weigh 10 pounds or something. I mean, the size, that's all kind of hand waved, I guess, from the technology of the future that this world has, I suppose.
Well, I think she's also, because I looked up the scene, I was like, what is this? I remember this, but not like fully. So I looked it back up again. And if I recall, she's actually matching the aim of a crossbow. And a crossbow is going to have a lot more force behind it. So you're not going to, when you have a bow that you pull back, you're going to really have to kind of what you call stack your aim. So you have to account for your force. So for me, on my bow, I have pins that help me target something for 20, 30, 40, I think 45 yards. But if something's 80 yards, I have to stack my pin to account for gravitational force. So because that arrow is going to go up and down. So I have to I have to pick a point, and I have to figure out, okay, I need the distance between the 20 and the 40 to go above it, and then do it one more time to hit that 80 kind of mark. Like, it's been a long time since I've done the stacking, so I'm kind of have to figure out the math again. But the whole point is, like, you have to account for that arc and pull. And so if you're trying to shoot at the same plane as a crossbow that has so much more bolt action force behind it, you're going to fall short. So
it's not the same weapon.
No. You need a lot of force behind it. And especially if you're carrying something with explosives on the tip, that's going to go, you have to factor that in too.
I mean, what happens if you then drop the arrow at that point?
Oh gosh, that is it.
Does it then explode on the ground? I have so many questions about her exploding arrows. Perhaps it's best not to think too much about it because it makes less sense.
So I also don't know what quiver she uses, because her I think one of your questions, like, kind of pet peeves. She's got this quiver and her arrows, like, don't move. And she's like whipping them out and doing a really, really quick succession of knocking and shooting her arrow in one of the training sessions. But her arrows don't move. And
in
the quiver. So at least in my own limited experiences in my quivers, my arrows, in order to get them out quickly, they're not secured. So I don't know how they don't move. And then she's able to just, like, kind of pluck them out like that, because they would usually have to be loose or whatever. So that's just my own personal little, like,
oh, I see what you're saying.
Because they're staying there and you're whipping them out as if they're not. So,
like, if they're not moving, that implies that they're packed so tightly that you shouldn't be able to pull it out easily, because you're going to yank all of them out because it's packed like, I don't know, a umbrella stand.
Or it's like
umbrellas, and they're all going to come out at once or something. That's a really weird image, but you know what I mean.
Well, trust me, as somebody who has literally, because I wear, I don't put the quiver on my back, I put the quiver on my side. As somebody who has leaned over to adjust something and had all of her arrows fall out onto the ground, it is just something where I'm like, how is she running and jumping and doing all this with arrows not moving, and then she can just so easily, like, slide them out? I mean, granted, she probably has had a lot of practice, but, like, I kind of want to know what quiver she's using to do that, because
feels like movie magic.
Not to mention trying to run with a bow and arrow. That just, to me, just even, like, trying to walk with mine is awkward at times. But
it feels like it would hit you in the back of the knees, maybe. Wouldn't it? I don't know. Maybe it depends on your bow.
But I'm also really short, so I'm, like, only 5'2". So most of these bows are, like, half my size, if not larger. So it's always just awkward.
I feel like Katniss is, I'm trying to think. I know she's described as, like, a physically small person in terms of being thin. I don't feel like she's described as tall. So I feel like she would not necessarily be able to easily run without having a similar problem of maybe the bow knocking into her as well.
And if it doesn't knock into me, it's going to knock into the person next to me. Because let's just face it, I do not have that dexterity, and I'm taking somebody out accidentally. Either myself or the person next to me. I just know that's going to happen.
Well, if you're in the arena, that could be good.
That is true.
These are all
Maybe
things
I feel less guilty when it's like they trip over themselves. Like, hey, it wasn't my fault.
You're just trying to survive the Hunger Games. So, moving on to the next question on the list, can you talk about what kind of things generally that you as an experienced archer think about when you see portrayals in books, movies, both of people practicing archery? Are there things that pop into your mind?
Most of them are silly. Mostly like if I see someone's hair is really down and like waving and they're shooting their bow and arrow, all I can think about is the time I've gotten my earrings caught, my headphones caught.
Oh, ouch.
Trust me, no matter how small your earbuds are, somehow there's always a way. And so I've learned very, very many hard lessons. Thinking something was short enough and it was not, or just getting my hair caught in something, but I do have a different bow and arrow. So when I use my compound, when I pull it back, it's, I guess for me, it's just kind of how I do it. If my hair is down, like sometimes it gets in my face. So it's just silly little things like that. Or, it did kind of bother me in the movies when she in the beginning wears a glove, in her scenes, but then she stops wearing gloves. And that string on your fingers, like it just kind of makes me like, that has got to hurt. Like you must have blisters all on your fingertips.
So it's standard to wear a glove when you try to look for the verb to, it's not arch.
So
is there a verb?
So with recurve, when you pull your bow back, you typically have your bow fingers covered because you're pulling all that back and the string pops through and it runs against your fingers. And you're pulling back a lot of force on your fingertips. And so it's usually very painful. So there's a little glove that you see people wear and it covers their like 3 fingers here. For me, my compound bow, I have a release. So there's a little loop on the back of my string that I pull back. And when I'm ready to shoot, I click a lever and that releases it. So that way I don't ever use my fingers because when I pull back my bow, I pull back 42 pounds. So that's a lot of force and weight on my fingertips.
For sure.
So you can pull it back kind of okay, but when you release it, it's just really going to hurt. So that's like one of the things that I noticed.
Just repetitive friction on your fingertips, like that's even with calluses, I would think that would get painful.
Yeah, and it does. And but for the most part, like in terms of pet peeves, like really, I don't mind that much because I'm not a serious archer. I did it for fun. My friend got me my bow after my hip surgery to kind of get me moving about, but in a way that wasn't high impact and to kind of get me out of the house. So I owe whatever I do to archery to him. Great guy. We would go to the archery range. We were working some shift works. So we had really weird schedules and we would be off in the middle of the day. And he taught me everything I know. And it's very cathartic. And for me, it's about just doing something for you. It's always nice to just kind of see people get interested in it. I don't want to get elite, I don't personally, I don't want to hunt. I just want to work and like enjoy the satisfaction of when you start seeing your groupings get better or you start seeing your consistency get better. And whatever that is for somebody, if it's Katniss, kicking butt and possibly in unrealistic ways, but it gets people excited about it and doing it and asking questions, it's totally worth it. Like, I think it's great. I thought it was great that people got into it and it kind of refreshed my interest back into it. A lot. So it doesn't matter to me if it's unrealistic. And it's just also like just very inspiring because people, they do trick archery. So they do these insane, like going on a horse, riding back and getting bullseye after bullseye after bullseye. Typically they're not pulling back much weight and it's very close up targets. So it is easier in the grand scheme of things to do it, but it takes a lot of skills and practice. And with recurve, you have to practice every single day because for me, I have pins to help me, target. I have like a peephole that helps me keep my sight steady. I have a level that helps me figure out when it's like tilted or not. And then the movies, like she's using a recurve and people do that. Olympic sports, like Olympic athletes, they use recurves. They have sights, they have weights and all this stuff to kind of counterbalance their bows and keep that steady. But really, it's a lot of discipline. it's a lot of practice. And I have a lot of respect for people who do recurve, because most people don't have the sights, the bells and whistles. Like, those are going to be your elite competitors. But just your average person, if they're good at recurve, like, it doesn't matter if they're only 10, 20 yards away, that shows dedication. It shows practice. And it's kind of like a pull-up. You know, like, if you can do a pull-up, you have worked very, very hard. And it takes consistency, it takes muscle memory, and it takes emotion that you are not used to doing. And so every pull-up that you do is super, super impressive, because that's dedication. And that's the same thing how I feel about with, especially like recurve. Longbows are even more challenging. That just shows that person has dedicated time and effort into building that repetitive strength, that muscle memory, that discipline. Same idea as ballet. They make very difficult things look easy. They make it look like you can just pick it up and do it. And it's just whatever gets people out and doing it, you know, as long as you're not putting people at risk and you're trying, like, it's great.
It's like, yeah, like any sport. It's the sort of the discipline, the journey, the setting goals. It's all very meaningful, and it's satisfying because it's not easy when you get there.
It's not. But it's also too, it's what I appreciate is, you know, people help you along the way. And I think that's really what it's about. And I don't want to be that person who is going to sit there and be like, oh, that's so unrealistic. Okay, sometimes I will be. Like, sometimes I will be. I will admit. Personally, I was an armchair wizard yesterday watching Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. But, you know, who am I to say they should have stupefied Peter Pettigrew? Easier said than done. But, yeah, with like archery, for the most part, it's just like, it's one of those things where I'm like, man, if I see somebody who's like really hardcore, like Katniss, it's like, oh man, I wish I could be like that. You know, I don't care if it's unrealistic. It's just still, it's like so cool to be like, can you imagine being so good at this? You become a hero for how good you are at it. Yeah, I think everybody secretly wants to be that kind of hardcore hero doing something that's very unique. So
like that moment, the crowning moment of awesome. I think we could call it when she shot, was it the apple? When the, what were their names? They were supposed to be raiding her, and they were all eating and not paying attention. She shot the apple to get their attention. Like, you know, that's
yeah,
moments like that. Which again, are they realistic? I mean, I'm sure people can do that. Can the average person do that? No, but
hey, if you're sitting there and that is how you survive day in and day out,
yep.
You never know. I mean, it's really like if they're close up, it's not that unfeasible. The fact that it's a brand new bow and arrow and she's only shot it once, like, that's kind of gambling with a lot of people's lives. But then again, they are kind of gambling with yours. So
she was pretty angry at them, which understandably, I'm definitely not giving her a hard time for doing that. I would have been angry at everyone too. But I mean, maybe there's an alternate universe Hunger Games somewhere where she did this and it went differently. But that wasn't the book that we read. So
yeah, if I recall, was it because they were all gorging themselves and they just lost interest in her, even though they were going to like gamble away her life? And just, it was like that realization that you really don't matter.
Yeah, I think they were eating and drinking, and I think she was one of the last people, if not the last, and she was just furious. She's like, here I am fighting for my life, and you can't even pay attention to me for 10 minutes to give me a rating.
Yeah.
Just snapped.
I mean, she held it together more than I would have.
Yeah, you know, I can't blame her. Her rage is righteous.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is interesting to see how in some of these, what I appreciate about these characters is the fact that they're all fighting, like, they take time to identify what is wrong with the society the way that it is. And that's one thing I appreciate about what authors do when they write about dystopian societies and young adult literature is they establish a world where something is wrong, and they establish the recognition that something is wrong. and that status quo needs to be changed. And they kind of find a way for someone to start developing those thought processes of, this isn't right. Why is this like this? And then they start kind of identifying cultural, societal issues, and they go about trying to fix them. And I like how in the Hunger Games, they have Prim, they have Rue, I believe it was, the little girl. And so they have this juxtaposition of pure innocence and just kind of desperation of just trying to get by. And then you have this exploitation of that and corruption. And I think it's just really fascinating how for every horrible society, they at least give some sort of example of good, of what to do about it. And I think that that's really critical in young adults. Driving for purpose and justice, whatever that might look like, and why fiction is so important in our world, because when you read nonfiction, you don't ever really get that chance to explore why or feelings. You have fact of, not the introduction of corrupt mindsets, of bad mindsets, of good mindsets, of troubled mindsets, of debating, what means justify the end, what end justify the means, in all those kind of questions. And I think it's really fascinating how they do that.
I think these are important, powerful narratives for anyone, but I think, especially for young adults.
It's nice to see where it's like, it's helpful to have it in a dystopian society, because when young adults get out into the world, not to make it like too heavy, but there's a lot of parallels, and at least you're giving people techniques to address situations and want to implement change in a healthier way, or at least question status quo in a society that's not real. Because when they're going to get out into the world, they're going to see that there are struggles in life, and you need to step out through multiple lenses. You need to see and step out in the world. You need to see through multiple lenses, and some people don't encounter adversity until they, are out in the real world. And in many ways, that's great, because you don't ever want somebody to have bad adversity, but you need to know how to recognize it and address it and understand what causes adversity. And I think these books are really good about doing that in a way that helps in a neutral environment be like, what do I say, or what are responses to these kind of situations? And like with Katniss being, sometimes hot-tempered, I think that's realistic. People lose their temper. But also people are asked to do almost impossible things when you think about in the world. And
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh no, it was just like, and it's interesting to see how communities from grassroots up start implementing change, and where did those recognition of what needs to happen here. So I think that that's where these dystopian books are very helpful in those kind of scenarios.
I think you see a lot of examples of flawed people trying nevertheless to do the right thing. Katniss being one of them. In general, how do you feel about books or movies that feature archery? Do you seek them out, avoid them? Are you generally neutral?
I don't actively seek them out, but if I'm like sitting there scrolling through Netflix, and I see something that piques my fancy, like I do gravitate towards things with it. I'm not somebody who's going to sit there and watch a documentary on it. However, if I watch some sort of medieval thing and there's archery involved in it, I love those kind of medieval castles, that kind of stuff. That's what I'm going to watch. There's a whole bunch of archers, like say in the Lord of the Rings. I love those archery scenes. Like those are my favorite scenes. And I gravitate to, I love the characters that do that, because for me, it's something to relate to. And I think that's really ultimately what we seek in fiction and in stories and movies, something that we relate to, because we want to put ourselves in those roles. So when someone's doing really a great job doing what we like to do, we tend to gravitate towards that. But I don't actively seek out archery movies unless it's Robin Hood Men in Tights. Love that movie.
Well, that's a different category. That one's a classic.
And I mean, I do love a good Robin Hood. I do love those remakes of those and spins on the classic story. But I like more of archery as a component or a character within a larger context. So I'm not going to necessarily seek out an archery dominant kind of thing, unless it's like a classic story like Robin Hood.
So like a good story that has it as a piece of it, like Lord of the Rings you mentioned.
Yeah.
Love those.
They're like my favorite characters is usually the one who does the archery.
Yeah, Legolas does some pretty epic archery.
That he does.
And you can hand wave that because he's, an elf. Yeah. Defying physics all over the place.
I mean, like elves, they have like what? Super strength, super endurance. They don't sleep much.
They never get a tangle in their long hair.
I know. I don't get it. It's not fair. It's not fair.
It's really not. Are there any tropes related archery that are pet peeves for you when reading or watching TV's movies that feature them? I know you've already addressed one, but you might have others. I don't know.
I don't really like, other than the ones I've already mentioned. I don't think so. It's just like, I guess if it were any other sport, I really wouldn't mind if there was just like this representation. Because I don't really think there's any bad way to portray, archery. It's because like, again, I just don't see how there's, other than just being like, oh, man, that person's going to get blisters, or it's really not that easy. But there's nothing like that really stands out to me. Like it's not really like that. I'm like, yeah, it's just a movie. It's a show. Enjoy it. I wish I could do that. I certainly can't. But I don't go out of my way and be like, oh, that's annoying. It's just kind of like having magic in a show. Like, it's not real. Doesn't mean you don't enjoy it. So it's just still something that's kind of what you think is interesting, and you're just going to enjoy it for being what it is. That's kind of how I take it.
I'm now thinking back to all the movies I've seen that featured archery, and for some reason I'm flashing on like the 1970s animated Robin Hood, and I'm going, well, that one's not really trying to be realistic because it's a cartoon. It's very fun. I don't know if you've seen that one.
Yeah, no, I think it's more like, for me, it's just more, I enjoy it. I enjoy it when it's featured. And it's just, I'm trying to think of like, it's almost like a really fun outfit or costume design. You appreciate it for what it is, even though you would never wear it. It's just
enjoy it. Don't overthink it too much. That's fair.
Because like I said, it's not my profession. I'm not a professional. I'm not an expert. For me, I do it for myself. I did it for my recovery. I did it for time with my friend. And I did it to just kind of be like, I want to see tangible success. So I want to feel like I'm getting better at something and doing something that I enjoy.
Which is very meaningful.
Yeah, so I never competed or anything. I wanted it to be fun. I wanted it to be only for pleasure.
There's a lot of meaning in doing things just for yourself without needing to have like external recognition for it. So switching gears a little with the questions, how did you feel about Katniss as a character?
So I liked her at the beginning, I think, more than I liked her at the end. And I have to say this, recognizing going through trauma, being a symbol of rebellion, being asked to do impossible things, and being so young when you're asked to do it, that affects you. You're never coming out of that as the same. And, you especially as young as she was like in her teens, I think it was.
She was 16, maybe, I think.
Yes. Okay, so 16?
16, something like that.
Yeah, so I have to step back and be like, oh my gosh, because I read them when I was in my 20s. So for me, I'm like, okay, when you were 16, you would have not handled this well. So, I mean, I don't think anybody would handle it well. But I think for me, it was just kind of the weird dynamic of the love triangle. I think that for me was where it got a little bit complicated because I loved PETA. So I loved him. So I always felt kind of bad for him that he would do all these things. But I get, for her, I loved her in the beginning. And then the parts where she's still kind of true to her cause. And I did like the fact that, she did walk away from somebody who she just was like, this is not you cannot let go of everything I'm trying to get away from. But it was just like that weird dynamic for a bit in the middle that I was when they were trying to make their whole relationship all about the showmanship. I think that in itself bothered me more than the character. Mm-hmm. But, I do recognize that, these kind of issues, these hardships, they change people, and it's not going to be easy, and they're gonna break. They're gonna need, or she didn't really break, but get very close to that breaking point. And in the book, people do break, because you're asking children to do horrible adult things. And I know that the book, they didn't go into like as adult kind of graphic things, thankfully. But you do know like those kind of war kind of situations and kind of survival of the fittest, they're going to always affect people. So I have to step back and be like, okay, wait. So some of these things that you maybe got annoyed with a little bit, like be realistic in the grand scheme of things of how this affects a person. But I think that overall, like her character, it's a very good character, because you do in life go through highs and lows and challenges. And I do like the fact that she's not a perfect hero. But I do think that my favorite characters were actually not her.
Who are your favorite characters?
So I think I liked Peeta a lot, and then I really liked her little sister.
Oh, Prim. Oh. Yeah. Yeah.
And Rue. I like Rue a lot too.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the hardest parts of the book is when Rue dies. That's just heartbreaking.
But I do like the fact that, I love the idea of Katniss being the first to volunteer. Was she the first volunteer? That she volunteered. Mm-hmm. And then, everything she did, it was to try to, stop the situation from happening. And I do like the part when they were given choices. They were trying to think about how to beat the system. And I think that that's really, really cool too.
Was there anything I didn't ask about that you want to share?
Trying to think. I don't think
anything about the series, anything about archery,
Let's see.
No pressure.
I need to go rewatch the movies again, because it's been a hot minute since I've seen them.
Me too.
Have you seen the new one?
No, I'm trying to decide how I feel about watching that, because I have a hard time with prequels, to be honest with you, because it feels like we get these stories, we love them, and then they go back and make a prequel, and the future is a written book, and I'm having a hard time because it's all about President Snow, is my understanding.
I think that's
and I'm having a hard time getting interested in his origin story, because we know what he's going to do. And I'm like, okay, I'll probably sit down and watch it, because, he's an interesting character, even though he's awful. But there's a part of me that's kind of like, come on, this is like doing the prequels to how Darth Vader became Darth Vader.
I was going to ask you, I was like, did the Star Wars prequels ruin it for you?
Yes, they did. Even though I did like Ewan McGregor's Obi-Wan Kenobi. I thought he was.
Okay, yeah, no, he was great. He was great.
Yeah, he did a great job as that. But part of me is like, okay, future mass murder, having a real hard time identifying with its hero's journey right now. So I don't know, complicated feelings. That being said, it looks like it's like very well. I mean, of course, the production values are high. It looks like they put a lot of thought into it. So I'm like, all right, maybe I should give it a try. I am a bit of a completist, but
I get that.
Complex feelings. What are your thoughts on the prequel?
I guess it's like, part of me is like kind of curious to be like, what drives people to do these things? What about dystopian society says, oh, let's do survival of the fittest? Like, that to me is, I'm just like, where is that, like, in someone's idea of their mindset of, binning people into different districts and being like, let's go fight them against each other. But because to me, I'm just like, where does that in any society do anybody any good? And I think that would be more of where I'm kind of like curious to see how they go from, conflict to that as the solution. It's like the same thing with like the Divergent series. For me, it's like, it's interesting when you just kind of assign people to a life and just basically be like, this is your life. There's no getting out of this. So I think that's just kind of where I'm kind of curious to see how they do that, because it just seems interesting that people try to assign an identity to people when people are their own identities. And I'm just kind of curious to see how it comes about. And
I guess, that could be the way to think of it. Like, what's the psychology behind giving this prescribed, not pleasant future? Why is this the best thing you can envision? What about it makes you think that this is the best future we can make happen?
Well, it's like, I get history is written by the winners.
Sure.
Yeah, and I get that's where with like the capital and everything, like you won and you make sure that everybody knows that you won. But at what point do you then overall lose because nothing else functions? And so like, kind of, it just seems weird to me. I just don't understand where that thought process gets into somebody's head of like, I know what we should do after we rebuild. Fight to the death. Like, no, like just to me, I'm like, why?
Yeah, I mean, like if you're trying to avoid a rebellion, that's not the way to do it. Killing people's children is not going to calm things down.
I know. And it's just like, what was it? Oh gosh, what is that phrase when it's something like, it's about like when you're in command. Well, I'm just drawing a blank right now, but it's about those who like rule with fear versus respect.
Oh yeah.
What is that phrase?
There is a saying, and I'm blanking on it too. But
no, but it's like any sort of authoritarian regime. I just don't understand why. Like, and I get where it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy of like, you're so afraid of losing hold of your power because you oppress people. You're addicted to power. But I always just like kind of always wondered that, where it's, how do people always think the authoritarian grasp control and punish the losers, for lack of better terms? Like that never works out in history. Like there's no stability in that.
There's no future in that. It will always collapse under itself.
Yeah.
Eventually, because people can only take so much.
Yeah. And that's just kind of where, for me, that's the interesting approach is, why is that everyone's first response at the end of the war is victor, losers must be punished. And it's not everywhere, but it's just like overall in a lot of these themes and many parts of the world, it's swings of the pendulum. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, it feels like to me personally.
Let's clamp down and make everything really rigid and let's control everything as much as possible.
Yep.
What could go wrong?
It does make for good literature themes, though. I must say. Yeah, but I feel like it's one of those things where it wouldn't be a theme if it weren't prevalent and relevant.
Certainly something in humanity that makes it keep coming up again and again.
Yeah. So I think it's important to keep writing about it so that people recognize it.
Sure. All right. Well, you've inspired me to go back and watch the movie despite my complicated feelings towards prequels.
Yeah. I just like, I had the same wonder about you. I was like, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Don't mess with a good thing. Cause I too had my prequel scenarios ruined by Star Wars.
Well, thank you so much for talking to me today.
My pleasure.
I feel like I know like 300% more about archery than I did before I started talking with you. Although, of course, I still don't know very much. But this was fascinating. I feel like you shed a lot of light, and it was a pleasure to talk to you about the books and young adult literature in general. So thank you so much for making time.
And if you have any interest, there is a free archery range that my friend taught me at. On Route 3, right by the Wegmans. It's past Wegmans. It's Anne Arundel Archers. It's one side of it is open to the public. So this is off of Route 3, Crofton, Maryland. And everyone there is super nice. One side's open to the public. They have kind of rules about, how to shoot, just kind of general safety things. I haven't been there in ages because I've now moved to Virginia, but if you have any readers who are in the Maryland, DC area, I encourage them, especially if they're in the Maryland area, to check out Anne Arundel Archers. They're super friendly. And just, again, if you just kind of want to dabble, or if you have a bow and you haven't picked up for a while, just no pressure place. And I hope that people really enjoy it and ask questions. My friend took me to Bass Pro Shop. That's where I first picked up a bow. They have places where you can try out bows. So if you just want to be like, I don't know if this is for me, I want to try a bow, that's always an option too.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. I'll put a link to that place in the show notes. So if anyone wants to check it out, they can.